On a stretch of Newfoundland coastline that most Canadians have never set foot on, there are fossil impressions in the rock that are 570 million years old. The organisms that left them did not have mouths. They did not have stomachs. They did not have any reproductive organs we can identify. Paleontologists have been studying them for 60 years. As recently as this year, in 2026, scientists were still publishing papers arguing about which way up they were when they were alive. That is one entry on this list. It is not even the most unsolved one. These are 12 Canadian mysteries that science still cannot explain. We are starting in a small mining town in the Crow's Nest Pass. On the night of April 29, 1903, number 12, the Frank Slide and the bodies that were never recovered. At 10 minutes past 4 in the morning on April 29, 1903, the east face of Turtle Mountain came off. Somewhere between 82 and 110 million tons of Paleozoic limestone slid off the mountain in roughly 90 seconds. The debris traveled at speeds approaching 120 kilometers an hour, crossed the valley floor, and climbed 145 meters up the opposing wall before it stopped. The town of Frank, Alberta, sat at the base of that mountain. Most of the town survived. Part of it did not. The geology has been settled for over a century. There was a specific anticline geometry, a thrust fault, and coal mining at the base by the Canadian-American Coal and Coke Company. A wet winter was followed by a hard freeze on the night before. The Blackfoot and Kootenai had a name for Turtle Mountain that roughly meant the mountain that moves. They refused to camp beneath it. The Alberta Geological Survey now maintains over 80 monitoring stations on the South Peak. Another slide is considered inevitable. So if the geology is solved, why is this on the list? Because the dead are not solved. The standard tourism number is 70. Some sources say 76. The actual figure, by every credible accounting, is somewhere between 70 and 90 people. 12 bodies were recovered immediately after the slide. A few more were uncovered later during road construction. The rest are still under there, sealed beneath 30 to 45 meters of crushed limestone, where they have been for 123 years. There is a popular legend that a single baby was found alive on top of a boulder, untouched by the slide. Locals call her Frankie Slide. She did not exist. 3 infants did survive that night. Marion Leach, 27 months old, thrown clear onto a pile of hay, is the most likely source of the myth. She grew up and reportedly hated the legend her entire life. The last living survivor, Gladys Ennis, died in Bellevue, Washington in 1995. She was 93 years old. The mystery here is not what happened. The mystery is who exactly is buried under that rock. We do not have a complete list. The town's records were partly destroyed. Some miners were transient workers without families to report them missing. Drive through the Crow's Nest Pass today. The slide is right there, still mostly bare, still gray, still recognizable. Somewhere under your feet, 20 or 30 or 40 people are still where they were when the mountain fell on them. Their families never got bodies back. Their headstones, where they exist at all, sit over empty ground. It has been 123 years. It is not getting solved. Number 11. Henry Hudson set adrift in his own bay, June 22, 1611. James Bay, the English explorer. Henry Hudson had spent the previous winter trapped in ice on a ship called the Discovery, with a crew that had decided he was the reason they were going to die. The mutiny happened that morning. The mutineers, led by a navigator named Robert Jewett and a sailor named Henry Green, lowered a small boat called a shallop into the water. Into that shallop they put 8 people. Henry Hudson, Hudson's teenage son John, 6 other loyalists, and a carpenter named Philip Staff, who was not on the mutineers list, but who refused to abandon his captain and chose exile. They were given some clothing, powder and shot, pikes, an iron pot, and limited food. The Discovery sailed away. The shallop was last seen tied behind it with the 8 men aboard, before the line was cut. They have never been seen since. It may be the oldest unresolved disappearance tied to Canadian waters. The mutineers themselves did not all make it home either. Green and Jewett died fighting Inuit on the return voyage. The survivors, including a sailor named Abakuk Prickett, made it back to England in 1611, where they were tried for the mutiny. They were acquitted of murder. The entire historical account of what happened on the Discovery is based on Prickett's journal, written by a man with an obvious motive to make the mutineers look reasonable and Hudson look unhinged. Modern historians have not let it go. Peter Mancall at the University of Southern California, in his 2009 book Fatal Journey, argued from physical evidence on the Discovery, including bloodstains and the disposition of Hudson's possessions, that the castaways were probably murdered before they were ever set adrift. That Prickett lied. That the shallop was a cover story. Multiple search expeditions have looked over the centuries. None have found anything definitive. In 1631, Thomas James found the remains of some sort of structure on the shore of James Bay that he speculated might have been built by Hudson's survivors. It was never confirmed. Folk tales of inscribed Hudson stones have circulated for centuries. None have ever held up. So here's what we know. 8 men were lowered into a boat in James Bay in June 1611. None of them came home. We do not know if they reached land. We do not know if they survived hours, or weeks, or longer. We do not know whether they died of starvation, of exposure, of contact with indigenous people they did not know how to trade with, or before they were ever lowered into the water at all. The man whose name is on the bay, the strait, the river, and the county is officially classified by history as Fate Unknown. He has been Fate Unknown for 415 years. Number 10. The Bone Island. There is a small island in the river that divides New Brunswick from Maine. It is 6.5 acres. The locals call it Bone Island. By the spring of 1605, half the men who landed on it the previous summer were dead. The expedition was French. Pierre Dugois, Sieur de Mons. A young cartographer named Samuel de Champlain. They put 79 men on the island in June 1604 and started building what they expected would be the capital of New France. Within 9 months, 35 of them were in the ground. 20 more nearly died. The killer was scurvy. The French called it mal de la terre, the sickness of the land. They did not know it was scurvy. They knew their crewmen's gums were rotting and their teeth were falling out and their muscles were tearing themselves off the bone and that it was killing roughly half the colony, but they had no idea what was causing it. Champlain ordered autopsies. Those autopsies, conducted in the winter of 1604 to 1605, are the first recorded post-mortem examinations performed in North America. The cemetery has been eroding into the river for 4 centuries. By the time the United States National Park Service excavated it in 1969, 23 sets of remains were left to recover. They were reburied in 2003. But before they went back into the ground, they were given a CT scan at the hospital in Bar Harbor. A 2014 study in the International Journal of Paleopathology confirmed scurvy in at least 14 of the 25 adults examined. The bones showed the exact pattern that scurvy produces and almost nothing else does. And one of the skulls had cut marks on it, unmistakable, made by a metal blade, made after death. Physical confirmation 4 centuries later of Champlain's own written account of the autopsies. Here is what is still unsolved: the names of the dead. The party that landed on Bone Island included artisans, sailors, courtiers, and what Champlain himself called in his journals, ruffians and thieves. None of the bodies have ever been individually identified. We have the bones of 35 Frenchmen who died on a small Canadian island 421 years ago, and we cannot tell you who any of them were. The river is still working at the island. Every few decades, more graves come out of the bank. Eventually, it will take all of them. Number 9, the crater lake that holds too much history. In northern Quebec, deep inside Nunavik, there is a near-perfect circular hole punched into the tundra, 400 meters deep, 3.5 kilometers across. A lake of dark water sits at the bottom. The water is 245 meters deep. The crater itself was made 1.5 million years ago when something fell out of the sky. Its name is Pingualuit. In Inuktitut, the word means roughly where the land rises. The Inuit of Kangik-Sujuak have always known about it. To them, it is sacred. A United States Air Force aircrew flying over Nunavik during the Second World War spotted it from the air in 1943. For the next half-century, settler science called it Chub Crater and then New Quebec Crater. In 1999, Quebec officially returned the original Inuktitut name to the official record. Pingualuit is one of only 2 places on Earth that contain a continuous Arctic paleoclimate record stretching across multiple ice ages. The other is a crater in Russia. Most ancient Arctic sediment archives were ground out of existence by the Laurentide ice sheet, which covered Nunavik repeatedly over the last million years. Pingualuit's 400-meter walls protected the lakebed, and so the lakebed kept recording. In 2007, a Université Laval scientist named Reinhard Pienitz led a winter expedition to Pingualuit. They cut through the ice. They drilled into the bottom of the lake. They pulled up a sediment core 9.5 meters long. Inside the core, they found 2 layers that should not be there. Decimeters thick, dark gray. Organic rich. Sandwiched inside what was otherwise an ordinary record of glacial silt. The 2 strange layers are interpreted as deposits laid down during warm periods between ice ages when the lake was open water and life was thriving in it. The problem is, we do not know which warm periods. One of the layers may correspond to a warm period 120,000 years ago. One may correspond to 200,000 years ago. They could be older than that. The cores potentially span most of the last 800,000 years of Earth's climate history, but we cannot date the strange layers with the precision the rest of the record requires. We also do not know how the sediment survived at all. The Laurentide ice sheet should have scraped this lakebed clean. There is a theory that a cold-based ice cap, frozen to the rim of the crater, sat there for millennia, while warm-based ice everywhere else around it ground down to bedrock. That is plausible. Nobody has proven it. So here is what is sitting at the bottom of a sacred Arctic lake. 1.5 million years of climate data. 2 unexplained organic layers from warm periods we cannot precisely date. And no way, with current technology, to read most of it. The Inuit have always known the place was holding something. We are still working out what. Number 8. The Mad Trapper of Rat River. The Yukon and Northwest Territories border, December 1931 to February 1932. A man calling himself Albert Johnson arrived at Fort McPherson in July of 1931. He spoke English with a Scandinavian accent. He refused all conversation, all photographs, all attempts at acquaintance. He bought what he needed and went into the bush. On December 31, 1931, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police constable named Alfred King knocked on the door of Albert Johnson's cabin to ask about reports that he had been tampering with other trappers' lines. Johnson shot him through the door. What followed is one of the most famous manhunts in Canadian history. 48 days, 240 kilometers of bush, average temperatures around -40. It was the first time the Royal Canadian Mounted Police used aircraft in pursuit of a suspect, with bush pilot Wilfrid May flying air support. On January 30th, Constable Edgar Millen was killed by Johnson in a shootout. On February 17th, Special Constable John Moses fired the bullet that hit Johnson in the pelvis on the Eagle River. He died there on the ice. In his pockets, the police found $2,410 in 1931 money. That is roughly $47,000 in 2025 terms. They also found gold, fish hooks, Beecham's pills, a dead squirrel, and a set of gold dental fillings that came from a quality of dentistry inconsistent with a man who lived alone in the bush. He had no identification, no documents, no name that anyone could verify. In 2007, a film production company exhumed Albert Johnson's body in Aklavik with full forensic support. The team included anthropologist Dr. Owen Beatty, the same scientist who had previously exhumed members of the Franklin expedition from their graves on Beechey Island. The body told them things. He had scoliosis. One foot was longer than the other. There was a healed spiral fracture in his femur consistent with a recorded explosion of his ammunition pouch during a gunfight. The oxygen isotopes in his tooth enamel showed that he had grown up in either Scandinavia or the American Midwest. The DNA excluded all 4 leading suspects who had been proposed over 75 years. 12 different families had submitted DNA on behalf of relatives they thought might be the mad trapper. None of them matched. As of 2026, advanced genetic genealogy by an American forensics firm has narrowed his ancestry to Swedish heritage, with descent from a couple born in the late 1700s. That genealogy line is shared by tens of thousands of North Americans. The problem is not lack of evidence. The problem is the kind of evidence. The man who called himself Albert Johnson left no fingerprints in any record-keeping system that existed before 1932. His teeth pointed to dentists who are now dead and whose ledgers are lost. His DNA points to a heritage line so common that narrowing it further is, for practical purposes, almost impossible. He has been buried in Aklavik for 94 years. He is still nobody. Number 7. The Vanishing of Ambrose Small. December 2nd, 1919, Toronto. Ambrose Joseph Small had just become a millionaire many times over. The previous afternoon, he had deposited a $1 million check, the down payment on the sale of his 30-theater Ontario chain, into his personal account. The total sale price was $1,700,000 in 1919 money. He owned the Grand Opera House on Adelaide Street in downtown Toronto. He was, by Edwardian standards, a very rich man. That evening, he met with his attorney. He bought a newspaper from a vendor on Adelaide Street. He turned up the velvet collar of his coat against the December wind, and he disappeared. His disappearance was not reported to the police for 14 days. Toronto Bay was dredged. The basement of the small mansion was excavated. The furnace at the Grand Opera House was dug up and sifted as late as 1944, looking for cremated bone. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who happened to be visiting Canada in 1922 and had a sideline as a self-styled detective, was consulted by Toronto police. He declined to take the case. A reward of $50,000 was offered. Nobody ever successfully claimed it. The strongest contemporary suspect was Teresa Small, his wife and sole heir, who was investigated repeatedly. She was officially cleared at an Ontario Attorney General's special inquiry in 1936. Nobody really believed she was cleared. The lead Ontario Provincial Police investigator, Edward Hammond, reportedly believed to the end of his life that she had been involved. The secondary suspect was the personal secretary, John Doughty. Doughty stole $105,000 in victory bonds from Small's office, safe in the days after the disappearance, and fled to Oregon under a false name. He was caught the following year. He served 5 years for the theft. He maintained, until his death, that he had nothing to do with the disappearance itself. Nobody really believed him either. The case was officially closed on December 4, 1960. 41 years to the day after Small disappeared, +2. Closed without resolution. 3 serious modern reconstructions have been written. Katie Dobbs' 2019 book, The Missing Millionaire, sided with Hammond's view that Teresa was involved. Author Peter Vronsky cited what was claimed to be a 1997 letter from Hammond detailing a police cover-up. The letter has never been authenticated. Orlo Miller, in 1978, argued that Small was burned alive in the furnace of the Grand Theatre in London, Ontario. The Small case cannot be closed for the simplest possible reason. The body has never been found. The suspects are all dead. Every potential physical site has been searched and researched. The trail went cold in 1919, and 107 years of further investigation has not warmed it. Michael Ondaatje wrote Ambrose Small into his 1987 novel In the Skin of a Lion because the disappearance had remained unsolved long enough to function as Canadian myth. Almost 40 more years have passed since the novel was published. The myth is still the myth. Number 6. The Flying Dutchman of Lake Superior. November 21, 1902. The SS Bannockburn was a Canadian-registered, Glasgow-built bulk freighter owned by the Montreal Transportation Company. She was carrying 85,000 bushels of wheat from Fort William, what is now Thunder Bay, to ports in the lower Great Lakes. Her crew numbered 21 men, captained by George R. Wood. The youngest was a wheelsman named Arthur Callahan, 16 years old. The oldest was 37. She left Fort William on November 20th. A slight grounding leaving the harbor delayed her by a day. She set out again on the 21st. That morning, around 7 a.m., 2 sailors on the British Whig spotted her in the distance near Passage Island. Captain James McMaw of the SS Algonquin saw her clearly from 7 miles southeast, around 80 miles off Keweenaw Point. His logbook described her unique profile. A passenger steamer called the Huronic may have logged a final sighting at 11 that night. The Huronic's waiter, Fred Landon, wrote in his journal that night that it was the worst storm of the season. The Bannockburn was reported overdue on November 22nd. She was officially declared lost on November 30th. 4 days after the storm, the freighter Frank D. Rockefeller spotted a debris field near Stannard Rock Light. A single oar, life preservers, unidentified wreckage. A cork life jacket marked Bannockburn washed ashore later at the Grand Marais life-saving station on the Michigan coast. That is everything that has ever been recovered. 4 serious explanations have been proposed. A boiler explosion, which the lack of charred wreckage tends to argue against. Grounding on Caribou Island Reef, whose lighthouse had been intentionally extinguished 6 days earlier for the season. Striking the then uncharted Superior Shoal, 50 miles north of Copper Harbor, which is exactly the kind of feature a freighter could ride straight into during a snowstorm. Or simply foundering, taken under by the weight of waves and ice. The freighter has not been found. David Trotter's Undersea Research Associates, which has located dozens of Great Lakes wrecks, has not found her. The Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society at Whitefish Point has not found her. Minnesota Public Radio in 2018 named the Bannockburn one of the most sought-after undiscovered wrecks on the Great Lakes. 21 men, one Canadian freighter, 85,000 bushels of wheat, vanished into Lake Superior in November of 1902 and never recovered. There is a folk tradition popular among Lake Superior sailors for a century afterward that the Bannockburn is sometimes still seen on the lake, sailing in fog, as a kind of Canadian Flying Dutchman. That is a story. The actual mystery is older, simpler, and colder. She went down in a storm, and she is still down there, somewhere. Number 5. The Painter on Canoe Lake. July 8, 1917. Algonquin Park, Ontario. A 39-year-old painter named Thomson pushed his canoe out from a small cottage dock on Canoe Lake. Around 12:30 in the afternoon, he told a friend he was going fishing. The weather was good, and the lake was calm. His overturned canoe was found later that day, drifting empty. 8 days later, on July 16th, his body surfaced. You may not know his name, but you know his work. Thomson was the painter who taught the group of 7 what Canada looked like. The jack pine, the west wind, northern river. He was at the height of his powers when he died. He was about to break out internationally, and then he went out fishing on a lake. He had paddled hundreds of times in fair weather, and he did not come back. The local examination was performed by a vacationing Toronto physician named Dr. Goldwyn Howland, who happened to be at Canoe Lake when the body was recovered. Howland's report listed the cause of death as drowning. But the body told a more complicated story. There was a 4-inch bruise on his left temple. There was fishing line wrapped 16 or 17 times around his left ankle. According to some accounts of the examination, there was no water in his lungs, which is what you would expect to find in a drowning victim, although the records of that detail are contested. He was buried twice. The first burial was at Canoe Lake itself, on July 17th. 2 days later, on July 19th, the body was exhumed at his family's request and shipped to Leith, Ontario for reburial in the family plot. The exhumation in 1917 was performed at night by a single undertaker working alone with no family witnesses present. He worked alone. In 1956, an Ontario judge named William Little became convinced that Thomson had never actually left Canoe Lake. He led a small expedition to the original gravesite and dug it up. They found a body. The body had a hole in its left temple that was consistent with a bullet wound. A subsequent Royal Ontario Museum forensic analysis concluded that the remains in the Canoe Lake grave were Indigenous, not Thomson. This raises a separate question beyond the scope of this entry about whose grave Judge Little had actually opened. But this does not resolve the original question. We do not know with certainty that the body in the Leith plot is Thomson. The peer-reviewed historical reconstruction was published by Gregory Klages in 2016. The book is called The Many Deaths of Thomson. Klages identifies multiple plausible scenarios: drowning during a fishing accident, suicide in the context of a possible quarrel with his fiancée or with the cottage owner, Shannon Fraser, murder, possibly by Fraser, over a financial dispute, or by another cottager named Martin Bletcher Jr., with whom Thomson had publicly argued the night before his disappearance. None of those scenarios have been proven. None of them have been ruled out. None have been settled. The painter who taught Canada what its own landscape looked like went out on a calm lake, on a clear day, with fishing line in his canoe, and was found a week later with a bruise on his temple and no clear cause of death. The grave at Canoe Lake almost certainly contains somebody else. The grave at Leith may or may not contain him. There is no clear cause. He has been one of the most famous painters in Canadian history for over a century. Where his body actually is and how he died are still open questions. Whiteshell Provincial Park, Manitoba. May 20th, 1967. 12:15 p.m. This is Canada's best documented UFO case. Government and military files investigated it for years and never produced a conventional explanation. The Royal Canadian Mint commemorated it in 2018. It is $20 made of silver, and the image of the spacecraft on the back glows in the dark. The witness was a man named Stefan Michalak, Polish-Canadian, industrial mechanic, amateur prospector, former Polish Army intelligence officer. In 1968, he was psychiatrically evaluated at the Mayo Clinic in the United States. The evaluation found, and I'm quoting directly here, no overt evidence of significant mental or emotional illness. Michalak was prospecting roughly 150 kilometers east of Winnipeg when he saw two cigar-shaped, glowing objects descend out of the sky. One of them landed on flat Precambrian rock about 160 feet from where he was standing. The other took off again. He sat there for 30 minutes, wearing welding goggles and sketching it. About 40 feet across, domed, hissing, smelling of sulfur and burnt electronics. After 30 minutes, the craft rotated. A grid-patterned exhaust vent on the side opened, and it vented hot gas directly onto his chest. His shirt and undershirt caught fire. Michalak made it back to Winnipeg. He was admitted to Misericordia Hospital with first-degree burns laid out in a precise grid pattern across his chest and abdomen. He lost 22 pounds over the following weeks. His white blood cell count remained abnormal for months. The burnt shirt is in the University of Manitoba archives. It is part of the Chris Rutkowski donation of approximately 10,000 government UFO documents. On June 26, 1967, Michalak went back to the site with a friend. They recovered W-shaped, silver-colored metal fragments from rock crevices. The fragments were sent to the Whiteshell Nuclear Research Establishment for analysis. The lab reported that they were nearly pure silver, coated with a sticky substance, and showed traces of uranium-bearing radioactive material. Soil samples taken at the 15-foot landing ring also tested radioactive at levels that prompted federal health and welfare officials to seal off the site. The ring itself was independently photographed and verified by RCMP and RCAF officers who attended the location. The lead RCMP investigator was Corporal G.A. Davis of Winnipeg, CID. The lead RCAF investigator was Squadron Leader Paul Biskey, who began the investigation as a confirmed skeptic. His own report, written in 1967, includes this sentence: "There are certain facts, such as Mr. Michalak's illness and burns, and the very evident circle remaining at the site, which are unexplainable." The peer-reviewed analysis of the case by Chris Rutkowski was published in the Journal of UFO Studies in 1994 under the title, "The Falcon Lake Case, Too Close an Encounter." It remains the canonical examination. Skeptical readings of the case do exist. They generally argue that the silver fragments were planted, that the burns could have been self-inflicted using a frame of some kind, or that the radioactivity reflects ordinary uranium mineralization in the Precambrian rock. None of these readings have produced a single conventional explanation that ties together the burns, the metal, the soil, the witnessed ring, and Michalak's documented illness in the months that followed. The United States Project Blue Book reviewed the case and closed it. The American Condon Committee reviewed it and closed it. Both used the same word: unexplained. It has been 59 years. The Government of Canada has issued an officially commemorative coin for an event the Government of Canada cannot officially explain. The shirt is still in the archive. The site is still flagged. Stefan Michalak died in 1999, swearing to the end that the story he told was true. Number 3. The Disappearance of Hochelaga. October 3rd, 1535. Mount Royal. A French explorer named Jacques Cartier climbed a small mountain in the middle of an island and looked down on a town. About 50 longhouses were arranged in a circle, surrounded by cornfields. The population was estimated at between 1,000 and 2,000 people. The town had a name, Hochelaga. 68 years later, when the next major French expedition came up the same river, every trace of it was gone. Downriver from Hochelaga, near where Quebec City now sits, there was a larger settlement called Stadacona. Both towns were inhabited by people who spoke a language called Laurentian Iroquoian. It was related to Mohawk and Wendat, but distinct from both. When Cartier left in 1535, both towns were still standing. When Samuel de Champlain came up the St. Lawrence in 1603, Hochelaga was gone. So was Stadacona, so was every Laurentian Iroquoian settlement along the river. From the mouth of the St. Lawrence, all the way to a site called Roebuck in eastern Ontario. This is one of the most striking cases of a contact-era society disappearing from the European written record. An entire language, an entire confederacy. Gone in less than 70 years, and nobody on the European side documented how it happened. The archaeological footprint is also missing. In the 1860s, the geologist Sir John William Dawson identified what became known as the Dawson Site, beneath what is now downtown Montreal, and believed it was Hochelaga itself. In the early 1970s, archaeologists James Pendergast and Bruce Trigger re-examined the artifacts and concluded they could not confirm the identification. In February 2015, photojournalist Robert Galbraith forced an emergency halt to a Montreal sewer excavation when burials and artifacts started turning up. The exact archaeological footprint of Hochelaga has never been definitively located. 4 serious hypotheses for the disappearance remain active in peer-reviewed literature. Epidemic disease transmitted indirectly through trade contacts before Europeans arrived in person. Warfare with the Mohawk or the Wendat over access to the fur trade. Crop failure during the Little Ice Age. Or gradual, deliberate coalescence, in which the Laurentian Iroquoians joined other indigenous confederacies for political and economic reasons. There is no consensus. There is, however, an active investigation. A research team called the Dating Iroquois Project, led by Jennifer Birch at the University of Georgia, Sturt Manning at Cornell, and Christian Gates Saint-Pierre at Université de Montréal, is working with the Huron-Wendat Bureau du Nionwentzio to redate the chronology of the entire region. Their 2018 paper in Science Advances showed that previous timelines for Iroquoian sites were off by as much as 75 years, which means the timeline of the disappearance itself is being actively rewritten right now. Birch's framing matters here. She has explicitly written that she puts quote marks around the word disappearance. In her words, the Iroquoians did not just vanish, they scattered and eventually assimilated into other nations. To Western archaeology, an entire society is missing from the river. To the Huron-Wendat and to the Anishinaabe, those people did not vanish. They were absorbed. Their descendants are alive. The question of what happened to Hochelaga in indigenous oral tradition has an answer. The question of what happened to Hochelaga in the archaeological record is being slowly rewritten to match. Hochelaga may not have vanished at all. It may have scattered, merged, and survived under names the French never learned. Number 2. What is still down with the Franklin expedition? You probably know the headline. Sir John Franklin's 19th century Arctic expedition, 2 ships, the Erebus and the Terror, vanished into the Canadian Arctic in 1848. The wrecks were located by Parks Canada in 2014 and 2016, almost exactly where Inuit testimony recorded 150 years earlier, had said they would be. That is the headline. The headline is misleading. The wrecks resolved the question of where the ships went. They did not resolve the questions of why, of how, or of who. Multiple major Franklin questions remain genuinely active in peer-reviewed forensic literature in 2026. Start with the cause of death. For 30 years, the dominant explanation was lead poisoning. In 1984, the University of Alberta anthropologist Owen Beattie exhumed the body of a sailor named John Torrington from a permafrost grave on Beechey Island. Torrington's bone lead measured 226 parts per million. Inuit comparison samples from the same era measured between 26 and 36 parts per million. For the next 30 years, theories about exactly where the lead came from kept evolving. Solder in tinned food cans. The patented distilled water systems on board the ships were argued by William Battersby in 2008. Then a study published in 2018 reanalyzed the data and concluded that Franklin sailors' lead exposure was actually not abnormally high for the early Victorian era. Lots of 19th century English sailors had bone lead that high. The lead poisoning hypothesis, which had spent 30 years in textbooks, has lost most of its support in the last decade. Current consensus is shifting towards synergy, pneumonia, tuberculosis. There is visible Pott's disease in the bones of Seaman William Brain, scurvy, hypothermia, starvation. The men of the Erebus and the Terror probably died of all of those things at once, with lead being a relatively minor contributor, which means we still do not really know why they died. Then there is cannibalism. In 1854, an explorer named John Ray interviewed Inuit witnesses at Pelly Bay. Their testimony was specific. The English sailors had been seen, near the end, butchering each other. Charles Dickens, writing for his magazine Household Words later that same year, publicly destroyed Ray's reputation for repeating that testimony. He called the Inuit in print savages and unreliable. The Inuit testimony has been vindicated. In 2015, anthropologists Simon Mays and Owen Beattie published cut mark and pot polishing analysis on Franklin bones in the International Journal of Osteoarchaeology. The bones documented end-stage marrow extraction. People had been deliberately scraped and boiled. In September 2024, an even more remarkable identification was made. Douglas Stenton at the University of Waterloo and Stephen Fratt Pietro at Lakehead University identified one of the Franklin officers by DNA. A mandible recovered from a site on Erebus Bay on King William Island belonged to Captain James Fitz James. He was the second in command of the Erebus. The mandible bore cut marks. Even the captain of the second ship had been eaten. A separate identification in 2021 named an engineer named John Gregory. 2 of 129 men have now been identified by name. The other 127 are still bones in unmarked locations across King William Island. Franklin himself has never been found. Inuit testimony to Charles Francis Hall in the 1860s suggested that Franklin was either buried in a stone vault on King William Island or interred aboard the Erebus when the ship was reboarded by surviving men after the expedition's official abandonment in April 1848. Neither possibility has been confirmed. The lost documents may still exist. Russell Potter at Rhode Island College and Parks Canada's archaeologists believe that Captain Crozier's desk drawers, currently still inside the wreck of the Terror, are likely to contain journals and possibly daguerreotype photographs preserved by frigid Arctic water. Those drawers have not been opened. Safety protocols on the wreck have not yet permitted it. Earlier diving seasons recovered hundreds of artifacts from the Erebus, including, in 2019, a hairbrush with strands of human hair still attached. That hair is potential DNA. The annual investigation by Parks Canada's Underwater Archaeology Team, run by Marc-André Bernier, continues under a $23 million Inuit impact and benefit agreement signed with the Inuit Heritage Trust in 2023. This is the largest active forensic investigation in Canadian history. It is also one of the very few investigations that explicitly operates on the principle that Inuit oral testimony is a primary source. What we do not know, in 2026, is the names of 127 men, where Franklin's body is, what is in Crozier's desk, and whether, after the official abandonment of the ships in April 1848, any of the men ever made it back aboard the Erebus and sailed her south to where she ultimately sank. The wrecks did not solve the mystery. They opened it up. Number 1. The things we cannot read. The strongest mystery on this list is not historical, it is not political, it is not forensic, it is biological. It concerns the oldest complex life that has ever existed on this planet. Mistaken Point, Newfoundland. A 17-kilometer stretch of sea cliff on the Avalon Peninsula. UNESCO inscribed it as a World Heritage Site in July 2016. Access is by guided tour only, and you have to wear felt overshoes to walk on the bedrock so you do not damage what is on it. What is on it is over 10,000 fossil impressions, spread across more than 100 bedding planes. They are between 574 million and 560 million years old. They are roughly 100 million years older than the Cambrian explosion. They are the oldest assemblage of large, architecturally complex organisms that has ever been found anywhere on Earth. They were killed and preserved in place by volcanic ash falls. Geologists call the formation an Ediacaran Pompeii. The dominant fossils have names like Fractifusus, Charnia, Bradgatia, and Pectinifrons. As a group, they are called Rangeomorphs. The lead scientist on Mistaken Point. The man who led the UNESCO nomination is Dr. Guy Narbonne at Queen's University. His phrase for what these organisms represent is when life got big. Here is what is genuinely unsolved about them. We do not know what they were. The rangeomorphs cannot be confidently placed on the tree of life. Different specialists have argued in peer-reviewed papers that they were stem group eumetazoans, an ancient relative of all modern animals, or that they were fungi like organisms, or that they were members of an entire kingdom of life that has no living descendants and no modern equivalent. We do not know how they ate. These organisms had no mouths, no guts, no identifiable digestive structures of any kind. The leading hypothesis, called osmotrophy, is that they absorbed dissolved organic carbon directly through their outer surfaces. That would have required an Ediacaran ocean with concentrations of dissolved carbon that simply do not exist in any modern ocean. Other specialists have argued that osmotrophy at this scale is not biologically plausible. The argument is not resolved. We do not know how they reproduced. A 2015 paper in Nature used spatial statistics on populations of Fractifusus to argue for asexual reproduction by stolons, a kind of runner like strawberries use, plus possibly waterborne propagules. The actual reproductive structures have never been observed, not on a single specimen, after 60 years of looking. Recent papers are still debating. This is the level we are at, the basic architecture, the ecology, and the life position of these organisms, which way they oriented themselves in the water column, whether they stood up or lay flat, whether they were colonial or solitary. 60 years into formal study, paleontologists do not agree on what these animals looked like when they were alive. Rangeomorphs disappeared at the boundary between the Ediacaran and the Cambrian, roughly 538 million years ago. Whether they were eaten by emerging Cambrian predators, suffocated by changes in ocean oxygen, or outcompeted by the new wave of bilaterally symmetrical animals, no one can tell you which. The reason science cannot close Mistaken Point is structural. The organisms have no living analogs. There is no comparative anatomy to do. There is no DNA to extract, because DNA does not preserve at this depth of time. There are no other planets we know of with multicellular life to look at for comparison. The branches of the tree of life that the rangeomorphs grew on may simply be gone, and along with them the keys to understanding what they were. 500 million years ago, on what is now a wind-blown stretch of Newfoundland coast, something happened to life on Earth that reshaped what life on Earth was capable of. We can see the fossils, we can date the rocks, we cannot read the organisms. The phrase Guy Narbonne used was when life got big. We know it happened. We do not know what it looked like, what it ate, how it reproduced, or which way up it stood. We just know that for 30 million years, on what is now Canadian rock, this was the dominant complex life on this planet. And then it went extinct and took its answers with it. There is a pattern across this list. If you look at all 12 entries together, it is not the pattern of unsolved cases that get solved with one more clue. Most of these mysteries are not waiting for a single missing fact. They are waiting for whole categories of evidence that probably do not exist anymore. If you made it this far, consider subscribing. There is more on the way. We will get to all of them. Thanks for watching.